Mari Okada is one of my favorite people in anime. Something about her work feels connected to something personal to her, or at the very least relatable to the viewer when it comes to her writing, and in doing so these projects that she's a part of are able to strike that emotional high note that many fail to achieve, as when something feels honest and not artificial, the feels, as anime fans like to put it, will swoop in far easier than those that try too hard, which then end up coming across as clumsy and laughable due to how they attempted to move you. People like Okada understand how emotions work, and because of that, it's why projects she's a part of generally are quite emotional and also memorable. With how she explores worlds and her characters, you just don't get to see a talented person like her that often who seemingly can do it all, which is why her name is widely known and why P.A.Works wanted her to jump from a writer to helming her own movie, both from a written and directing standpoint, which almost never happens. Whether it be action or a punch to the heart to make you cry, or maybe a somber character drama just meant to leave you thinking about what you just witnessed. Every project that she's worked on that I've had the pleasure of watching has ended up moving me on an emotional level to some degree, in the case of Anohana to tears, or at the very least has ended up in my favorites list such as Blossoms for Tomorrow and even my favorite anime of all time, Toradora, which she worked on the series composition for as well as scripted nearly half its episodes. The way her projects can naturally bring out these strong and vulnerable emotions has always impressed me, and walking out of her directorial debut with this original from P.A.Works, Maquia, When the Promised Flower Blooms, I have to say my expectations were absolutely met. And for those looking to shed a tear or two while watching one of the sweetest and most bittersweet mother stories out there, then this should be for you. I will be going over light spoilers, nothing overly specific, but rather just the progression the movie will take. I will be discussing that and how I felt, so small warning if you are one of those people who want to know as little as possible. Maquia is a really fascinating film, as very few anime go the route of showcasing someone's entire life, but if done correctly, can really make you feel fulfilled with its cast of characters, as you rarely get to see that large amount of character growth, since usually we're stuck with one period of a character's lives and then left to fill in the blanks in our own time. Because this is a film, unlike TV anime that can use multiple hours to get this development across, a film is much more limited. But overall, I was quite impressed by how little I felt the pacing was iffy despite us jumping around different years in these characters' lives, and as rapidly as they do. The story follows a girl named Maquia, who is a part of a race known as the Lorf. This group, who live for centuries, age very slowly to the point that when a human life begins and ends, you won't be able to tell someone like Maquia aged at all, since they seemingly stop physically aging in their teenage years. They spend their days weaving the happenings of each day into a fabric called Hibole to record their history and their long lives. Lorf are taught to not wander outside their lands, as heartache and loss is to be expected, and they should only mingle with their own in their own land. Maquia, despite being surrounded by friends and even loved ones, feels alone, as if something in her life is missing, and after an outside kingdom breaks into their oasis and ruins their way of life, demanding their leader to follow them back to their kingdom, Maquia is separated from her people, and as far as we and she can tell, her home is destroyed because humans want the blood of immortality that they possess. Shortly after this frightening event, 15-year-old Maquia discovers a dead mother clutching her baby tight to her. Without any hesitation, she saves this child from the fate that was waiting for him, and thus the tale of the seemingly immortal mother and her new human baby begins, and yes, you can probably guess why this made me cry. Despite having high fantasy elements, you'd be surprised to learn how little it borrows from other heavy hitters in the genre, which I'm typically used to seeing. As if Okada just wanted to make a unique world but not have it be compared to other works set around similar time periods in a high fantasy environment. So she went the route of carefully detailing this world to the audience while avoiding it feeling overly complex, so we could just keep the focus back on the personal story at hand and not be lost in the world itself. Having this be set in a more medieval time period, fantasy elements, but with the main focus being on motherhood, this doesn't feel like an anime movie catered towards current trends by using high school characters in a high school setting, but rather what Mari Okada wanted to make and what a true Okada anime would look like when she has full control. So bless you, P.A.Works, for wanting this to happen. What truly makes this tale so gripping is, like an emotional ride such as Anohana, you know where the movie has to end to some degree. The tragic beauty to life is that it isn't limitless unless you come from Maquia's people, which is the reason life is so beautiful. We have one limited life and we must make the best of it. A parent's worst fear is outliving their child, and the hope is everyone will live a long and happy life and the chain isn't disturbed. Parents live a long life, the kids watch them pass, their kids watch them, and the cycle goes on and on. It's bittersweet, but what has to happen? The hope is we all live for a long time and go out at the appropriate moment. But right away we know who Maquia is and how everyone she meets throughout this film has to die before her. So the area I was most curious about was where Mari wanted to go with this. Would it just be a repeat of Anohana, where we stay grounded to normal reality then say our goodbye, or would something more unique take place? And personally, I think she went unique with this film and avoided it feeling like just a rehash of some of her best works, and I honestly thought I knew exactly how this movie would play out, but she threw enough unique twists to keep me surprised throughout this entire film, and in doing so, she just added on to that already impressive catalog of hers. The film takes us on this beautiful journey of a child learning how to be a mother as she raises this orphaned boy. Right away, she sees someone who is crying alongside her, and because they both lost everything, she finds peace in this boy, who she names Ariel. Without expecting to be a mother, he eventually treats her as one, and because of this, she embraces the title with open arms. Watching someone who has no idea what to do but is fortunate enough to have run into a nice family shortly after rescuing Ariel is enough to get the ball moving, but in order to keep it moving, this film needs to bring up new and interesting enough ideas with how this growth will be explored. The first third does a remarkable job showing us different stages in Ariel's childhood, and how a kid growing up with a Lorf mother, despite not truly understanding the differences between them, would turn out, and to no real surprise, he turns out like any other kid who just has to learn about the unfortunate truths to the world and concepts such as death. But because the human world dislikes those who are different, Maquia has to keep a low profile, and because of this, and the hunt for her people, she moves around a fair amount. What I really appreciate between Maquia and Ariel's relationship is how from her first minute with him up to the very last that we see, she feels like a mother without ever trying to be. In fact, she doesn't understand the concepts of motherhood at all, at least at first, and the fact that she became one without trying is what makes her one of the best anime moms that you can think of. When Ariel is a kid, he loves his mother, and when people make fun of him for being a mama's boy, he doesn't stop loving her. Maquia's entire life revolves around keeping him safe, and for Ariel, as long as he's with his mother, that's all he needs, even if he has to say goodbye to his friends because they are forced to move around so much. One of my favorite points in this film is when Maquia snaps and yells at Ariel because the weaving that she'd been working on to pay the bills was tampered with by Ariel, who thought that he'd help and make his mother something special to cheer her up. Shortly after, he runs away because she snaps at him, and when Maquia realizes what she just did and how she never meant it, it was just the stress getting to her, she finds his clothes, and then he surprises her as he made her think that he disappeared. They then laugh and make up. All he wanted in that moment was for his mother to laugh and not seem depressed, and her snapping didn't faze him at all, like she was scared of. All he wants is to protect her. That moment cemented this film into my heart. Something so genuine and beautiful that two different people with no true blood connection developed that level of real, genuine family, and it was truly remarkable. The family isn't blood, it's the relationship itself. It's such a relatable moment on both the mother and child side that most who watch will appreciate moments such as these. The first stage of the movie really touched me, and when the second stage rolled around and Ariel was getting older in his teenage years, and he knew that Maquia wasn't his biological mother, this is where the film went new and unique, and it was hard to predict where it'd truly go. As you have this war lingering in the background, the future of the Lorf are unknown, as there are survivors to her people, and one of which is being held captive, so they use these elements to actually build a fairly interesting world narrative, while also focusing on a kid growing up and becoming his own person. Like with most boys growing up, eventually being around your mother isn't like it once was, and how they portrayed a once close family to one that's now drifting away was some of, if not the best that I've seen in anime, simply because you have this adoption story. But it's made more interesting because of Maquia and who she truly is. Having your adoptive mother come from a group of people that are hunted for their blood or shunned by society due to racism, and knowing she isn't biologically your mother, people cracking jokes that you are together as physically you're looking the same age because physically she doesn't age, that would naturally shock and possibly separate many kids due to complex emotions that really are too much for a kid his age to handle. Of course, the viewer knows Maquia is his mother, but the way they explore how a child naturally would start to question things is handled very well, and even mirrors real life families that I've known to a certain degree. I just enjoy the complexity to this relationship. Often it's here's a loving family, insert some conflict, and then resolution. With Maquia and Ariel's, it's more of here's conflict which brings a family together, watch as they grow, watch as they find themselves, watch some more conflict and drifting apart, then the main resolution. With how much content is packed into this film, it's surprising how well it functioned past a few bumps along the road, primarily in the end stages. The first 2/3 of this movie are fantastic and really well done. A kid growing up with a loving mother who never tried to be one but adored being treated as such because this little boy saved her in her time of need just as she saved him, to now a girl who ages slower than any human, and as her son gets bigger she stays the same. With what that does to a once close bond, that's breathtaking and original. Where the film did take a bit of a dive is in the third act, and while I did enjoy it, my main issue is how I felt it needed an extra 10 to 15 minutes before it entered this new area to their lives. People grow up, they get jobs, and they move away from home. That's something that naturally happens and everyone eventually expects in a film that jumps around Ariel's life so much. But once we reach this point in the film, the anime almost feels like it skips a few scenes, like a Blu-ray player malfunctioning and skipped a part of the disc and you're left trying to rewind, but then you have the unfortunate realization that there's nothing you actually miss and that this is just how the film is. It's a tad jarring to say the least. The scenes after this do function well enough and I enjoyed them as much as the rest of the movie, but because we're following an entire life, the movie eventually hit a point where there was no natural way to transition to the next big point in their lives, and it can be shocking. Some part of Ariel's life will be longer than others, it's to be expected, but the transition from Ariel leaving home to where he and Maquia ends up just seconds later should have been handled better. Because this isn't a simple and happy family story for the entirety like the first chunk of Ariel's life would have you believe, I think the film is able to excel far past where I thought it'd end up. Having an adopted son dealing with these complex feelings of what a mother truly is, who he should be in life, and what that does to Maquia is some of the most emotionally gripping content I've seen in anime. Ariel will do things that will most likely make you mad, but most kids put in his situation would act the same. So you can't really blame him, but it doesn't make Maquia's sorrow any easier. Especially because all she cares about is being with Ariel, and even if he doesn't use mom anymore, that doesn't matter, any title will work for her. The film, for as mystical as it is, truly feels grounded to reality with how it gets across what many mothers have to deal with, especially single mothers. It's not an easy task raising a child on your own, and how in 2 short hours you feel for Maquia and all the mothers in the world. Hell, you end the film wanting to appreciate your own more than you already do. It's something to praise because the only reason so many walked out of this movie wanting to love their own mothers more is because this movie felt as if a mother wrote it, and because of that, it made a genuine and touching tale without feeling gimmicky or fake. When the movie concluded, I thought it was bittersweet. The outcome satisfied me and I figured we were done, but when the true final scene popped up, that's when I knew Mari Okada was pulling an Anohana card. That move that only she's nailed for me, where I knew exactly how this film had to end. It was inevitable, but once again, with how it's directed from music to visuals, forced me to cross my arms, pout as tears rolled down my face and the credits rolled. Because like in Anohana, the characters feel believable, genuine, their relationships are complex, and a story about a girl who seemingly doesn't age and her human son ended better and more bittersweet than I could have possibly hoped for. That somehow managed to tell an entire human life far better than I first thought possible with such a short time frame to work with. Visually, the film took my breath away even more than the story already did, and it's because of how backgrounds were details and lighting was directed to highlight the characters in this world. From the first few minutes, I was quite impressed with P.A.Works, as there's 100 shots that would make excellent wallpapers for your computer or phone, no matter where you pause, and honestly surpasses anime from their past, which I thought visually would be hard to beat. The beauty of a movie format is how, because there are a limited amount of frames in comparison to a TV anime, shots that are just there for a few seconds can be polished up more than if it was a weekly production, as the time constraints aren't as hectic and resources don't need to be spread so thin like in weekly production for television anime. The world is gorgeous, from buildings to plant life to the smallest of details you won't notice unless you pause and truly go over these backgrounds inch by inch, and at times zoom in to truly see how much care went into these shots, which yes, I did exactly that. With how lighting is used to convey emotions, as the way characters pop out really flourish, not because most character models are well detailed, it's because of how the lighting in any given shot keeps them in the focus in the perfect way. From how well lit shots capturing this beauty around them like a gorgeous sunrise to invoke this sense of hope and romance, to dimly lit emotional driven scenes in a gloomy room meant to get a true sense of sadness across, which makes those expressions all the more painful. And when it was a fairly tame scene with just a mother and her son, the way character models both blended in and popped out from these backgrounds left me speechless. The general movements to these characters and even the more fantasy designed creatures had these very smooth movements backing them, which made you buy into simple scenes such as characters walking, as rarely are shortcuts used to avoid actually having to animate something like you often see in the medium. The character designs did impress me a lot, as the way they were detailed, you notice a lot of expressive facial animation that really flourishes when Ariel is a kid, as you have these really adorable moments really show off the talent of the team, or when you have someone's heart break and they really wanted to make you cry alongside them. So when all sorts of emotions are explored, the way the body would respond as if a real person was in front of us is something that really keeps you in the moment. The worst part to the visuals is so minor it's not even really worth mentioning, but from time to time a gorgeous scene not meant to have the focus on a character's face, you'll notice a drastic dip in the quality of the faces if you do decide to look at them, as they weren't important enough so the makeup team didn't have to do anything special with certain scenes. Really, it didn't bother me, but I did notice it from time to time. Monica Iwami voiced Maquia in the Japanese dub, and simply put, this might be one of my favorite performances in anime. If I ever made a top 10 list, this character would most likely be in it, and that's a bold claim, I know. There's just certain voices I just love to listen to, and Maquia's is one of them. And even though she might sound a tad one-dimensional at the start of the film, the emotional high points and depth to this character really showcases the range this actor can deliver, and the only reason I was moved so much was because of how she delivered her voice for Maquia due to the stunning vocal directing and amazing talent. The score to the film was as beautiful as the art. Certain tracks really eat away at the background, and when the time is right, like a lion hunting its prey, it strikes you and hits all the right notes and makes you feel as painful as that hunting image I just placed in your mind, with the entire cast feeling quite human with their performances. And even when Ariel was in his "screw this, I don't need a mom" phase, it's impressive how believable he felt, as if that's how someone his age should sound, and it's not just an actor in a recording booth faking it till he makes it. Because this film takes place over the course of an entire human lifetime, the way the characters in this world age, from the audio to the visuals, really helps capture this bittersweet beauty that it aimed for as we watch Maquia on a physical level stay the same. The film definitely isn't perfect. The third act needed more time, and some of the lore story felt ham-fisted in a way that you could almost see this being a 3-hour movie, as there's enough to work with. But because this really boiled down to a tale of motherly love, it still functions well enough that the jarring pacing during the final stretch wasn't enough to ruin what I consider art, and because there's so much I adore about this film, I might be more forgiving than most with the final stretch. Because after a moment of disbelief of what just happened, I was right back into it, eyes glued to the screen, wanting to see where this mother and son would end up and who Ariel would truly become as he reached adulthood. That because they stuck to keeping it real, as if this tale feels like it could happen to any family if you remove the supernatural aspects like immortality and dragons, how a kid grows up with an adoptive mother, where his feelings go as he figures out who he wants to be and comes to appreciate who raised him and what family actually is, and ultimately where Maquia must go by the end. This movie took my breath away. To some degree, you know how it'll end, but because it's more than just an immortal mother raising her human son, it's that on top of that, it's a war-driven story where the world is hunting her people, wanting to unlock the secret of eternal life to rule a kingdom. It allows for this world and characters to be explored in a not so straightforward fashion that, yes, does end with what I was expecting, but everything leading up to it was truly interesting and I didn't see coming after the first act. For as much as the mother and son were the focus, the side cast was surprisingly interesting, such as Layla, who I won't go into specifics with, but had a really compelling story that ended on a high point alongside Maquia. The world had enough depth to its history which allows you to buy into current events and how the politics of this kingdom function, and why certain people look at the Lorf as they do, and why Maquia's people were warned never to leave home, and with the other Lorf characters having unique and distinct enough motivations to capture my attention for this entire film, even though some of their stories could have used an extra hour fleshing out. But still, everything the film focuses on truly gripped me, even if some areas were underutilized more than I would have personally liked. In some ways, I do wonder if maybe this should have been a 3-hour film just to flesh out these other areas that it did have to skim over, but because this film wanted to tackle the challenge of motherhood and the struggles of growing up, it's sort of fitting not everything in this film is perfect, as not everything is perfect about motherhood. Obviously, when you set out to make a project like this, you aim for perfection, but it's interesting to view the faults to the movie in this way, at least for myself. But for those who did watch this film, let me ask, did you find it emotionally gripping like myself, or was it a complete miss for you? Or maybe you just have some thoughts on the video. If so, be sure to let me know yours down in that comment section below. Also, remember to leave a like if you did enjoy my ramblings, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile and support what I do even more, you can head on over to my Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can help make videos such as these possible. But until next time everyone, please take care, hug your mothers, and have a good one.